All right, here we go. This is our last day of these notes. This is the back of the page, the back page. The front of it looks like this. It says Notes Day 65, Factor Trinomials, Solve Quadratics. Well, we've been factoring for 2 days now, and I'll bet you're getting pretty good at this point. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to solve some equations. So when you solve something, you have an equal sign. So if you look at all these problems on the back here, now you're going to see, oh, this equals something. Now, the idea of this, let me explain this. Let's say we have an equation. It will say if A times B equals 0. Let's say you have two numbers. One of the numbers is A, one of the numbers is B. And if you multiply them together, you get 0. What has to be true about one of those numbers? If you multiply two things and the product is 0, what has to be true about the factors? Well, either the A is 0 or the B is 0. So if A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. That has to be true. That always has to be true. Okay, 0 times anything is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. So one of these has to be a 0. And that's going to guide us when we're trying to solve these equations. A quadratic, just to review, so when you see that word quadratic, quadratic means ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's usually the form that we write a quadratic in. Okay? And the other thing that I'll just remind you of, when you multiply two things, so for example, if I say a times b equals 0, the two numbers that I multiply, those are the factors. And the value that I get, which is 0 in this case, is the product. Oh, sorry, I had to write that kind of small. Product. P-R-O-D-U-C-T. The goal of this, when you're doing these problems here, you know it's a quadratic because you have an x squared. Okay, if we look at number 19. Our goal is to try to factor this. Right now, if I move 13x to the other side, that's a problem because I'll have x's on both sides. So the question is, how can I get x by itself? To do that, we're going to factor. And if it's a quadratic, if it's a trinomial, we know how to factor this. So we're going to look at the left side. In this case, we have 22. So on the side here, let's take 22. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to 22 and add up to negative 13. So let's see, 1 times 22, 2 times 11, and I think those are the only factors that we have. So 2 and 11, if I add that up, that's positive 13. So to make a negative 13, I'm going to make both of these negatives. There's our winner. Now why is that still good? Well, if I multiply a negative times a negative, does it give me a positive? Yes, it does. So that's my winning combination. Now you can use the box, but you really don't need it because we can now write this. This is going to be x minus 2 times x minus 11 equals 0. Remember that this is an equation. Okay, so this is actually equal to something. It's equal to 0. So this is a factor, and this is a factor, and I'm multiplying them, and I get 0 as my product. If I multiply two factors, we'll come back to here, multiply two factors to get 0, what has to be true about one of these? Then A equals 0 or B equals 0. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my factors, and I'm going to say either this factor, x minus 2 equals 0, or this factor, x minus 11, is equal to 0. And I'm going to solve two equations. I put my line down to separate my left side, right side. To solve this equation, I just need to add 2, and we get x equals 2. Or here, we would add 11 add 11, and we get x equals 11. Now when you write your solution here, you can write it x equals 2, x equals 11. A lot of times we'll write this as a set. We'll say x equals, and we'll put a little bracket there, 2, comma, 11. There's our answer, right there. And you might be saying, well, how do you know that that's right? Well, let's take the calculator here. Let's take each choice and substitute it for the x. So if I think 2 is an answer, let me do 2 squared minus 13 times 2. All right, I use the same answer here, plus 22. Now that's the left side. The right side is 0, so the left side should give me 0. So if I hit enter, there it is, 0. That means my 2 is a solution. How about 11? Let me check that. So we'll do 11 squared, and I put it in parentheses, minus 13 times 11 plus 22. I should get a 0 for the answer, and I do. So both of my solutions are correct. You actually get 2 answers when you do this, and that's okay. When you have a quadratic, when you have an x squared equation, most of the time you're going to get 2 answers. All right, so what's the process that we're doing here? Well, step number 1, I'm going to write it on the side. Step number 1, factor. Okay? Step number 1 is you factor your trinomial. Factor trinomial. Step number 2, set each factor equal to 0. When you multiply 2 things and you get 0, okay, like back in number 19, I know that either this factor is 0 or this factor is 0. So I set each one equal to 0. Step number 3, this is the last step. Solve each equation, I'll just put equals, for x. Solve each equation for x. And that's what we're doing. Every problem, when you solve a quadratic, you want to factor it first. So you're making it, we're taking this and we're making this a multiplication problem. X minus 2 times x minus 11. I can take the factors and one of them has to be 0, or both. Okay? Let's do number 20. So x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 0. And you want this equal to 0. You can't factor until everything is on the same side. Step number 1, factor the trinomial. So we're going to look at 64. Let's see, factors of 64. And it has to add up to 16. 1 in 64, no. 2 in 32, no. 3 doesn't work. 4 and 16, no. 5, no. 6, no. 7, no. How about 8 and 8? Ding, 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 ding. There's our winner, 8 and 8. Now, it gives me a negative 16, so I've got to make both of these negatives. Negative 8, negative 8. Now let's see, does it work? If I multiply 2 negatives, do I get positive 64? Yes. If I add these, I get negative 16, yes. All right, so my factor pattern, we have x minus 8 times x minus 8 equals 0. That's my new equation. That's the same thing as this. I'm just writing it in factored form. Okay, now, if I multiply 2 factors and my product is 0, then one of these has to be 0. So I'm going to say, what if it's this one? X minus 8 equals 0. Let's solve it. We go plus 8, and we get x equals 8. Now at this point, notice that the second factor is exactly the same. So do I need to repeat the process? No. That's going to give you the same value. So in this equation, we actually get one answer, but we get it twice. When you write down your answer, though, all you have to do is say x equals, and the solution set is just 8. You don't need to write it twice. Okay, there we go. Let's take a look at number 21 here. We'll do one more, and then we'll stop for a moment. X squared plus 3x minus 10 is 0. All right, here we go, negative 10. Two numbers that multiply to 10, negative 10, and add up to 3. And which you might say, hey, how about 2 and 5? Which one of these is positive, which one is negative? Well, I have to get a positive 3x in the middle, so the 5 is positive, the 2 is negative. Negative 2 plus 5 is 3. All right, so here we go. Step 1, factor the trinomial. Step 1 is to factor. So I'm going to write this as x minus 2 times x plus 5 equals 0. There's my equation. Okay, step 2, set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to say x minus 2 equals 0, or x plus 5 is equal to 0. Step 3, solve each equation for x. So let's go put the line down, plus 2 plus 2. So I get x equals 2, or minus 5 minus 5, x equals minus 5. Now we get two answers. So our answers are negative 5, positive 2. Now if you write them positive 2, negative 5, that's okay. I usually put them in chronological order. So I put them in the order smallest and then biggest. Does it work? Okay, we should check this. I didn't check my last one, I'm going to check this one. Is my answer positive 2? Well, let's put the 2 in. 2 squared plus 3 times 2 minus 10. Does it give me 0? Check. How about my other answer, negative 5? Negative 5 squared plus 3 times negative 5 minus 10. That should also give me 0. Notice how I put the parentheses. I always use parentheses, especially with a negative number. Enter, I get 0. It's good. All right, so we're going to stop this as part 1, and then we'll finish it up as part 2.